Thanks, Amy. This is Shobhit from Fiddler. With companies accelerating adoption of AI, MLOps is a hot topic in ML teams, productionizing their models at scale. ML models are different from traditional software. ML models are data-centric, iteratively developed, and increasingly opaque. ML development is therefore also different from traditional development. A typical MLOps lifecycle involves data engineering, labeling, training, validation, deployment, and monitoring. This new workflow requires new processes and tools. To succeed in ML, companies need to embrace this new paradigm. Recent concerns around responsible AI and potential upcoming regulations also make it vital that companies implement ML correctly. We have on this panel some of the best MLOps team in the industry that focus on different parts of MLOps: data acquisition, experimentation, feature store, explainability, and monitoring. Let's hear their thoughts on MLOps and responsible AI. We have Omer, who's the co-founder and CTO at Explorium. Omer is a data science and software engineering veteran with nearly a decade of experience building AI models and drive big businesses forward. Hi, Omar.
Hi, guys. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure being here. Very exciting. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Omar. Then we have Patrick Dougherty. He has solidified himself as a deep domain expert in data science and data engineering space, starting his career in data science at Dell, and later leading a data science practice at Slalom Consulting. Patrick is the CTO and co-founder at Rasgo. Hi, Patrick.
Hey, Shobhit. Thanks. Great to be here. I'm joining from North Carolina. If we got any other East Coasters in the audience.
Thanks, Patrick. Then we have Chris Van Pelt, who's the co-founder and CISO at Weights and Biases, an experiment tracking platform for deep learning. Chris also founded Figure 8, which is also known as Crowdflower. Over the past 10 years, Chris has dedicated his career optimizing ML workflows and teaching ML practitioners, making machine learning more accessible to all. Hi, Chris.
Hey, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm calling from San Francisco today, and it's a beautiful, sunny fall day.
Thanks, Chris. Then we have Elena Samuylova, who's the co-founder and CEO at Evidently AI, a startup developing open source tools to analyze and monitor the performance of machine learning models. Elena comes with ML experiences spanning Yandex and startups and was named 50 Women in Product Europe by Product Management Festival. Hi, Elena.
Hi there. Thrilled to be here. And I'm representing Europe, calling in from St. Petersburg tonight.
Thanks, Elena. Finally, we have Amit Paka, who's the co-founder and CPO here at Fiddler. Amit is a consumer product veteran who loves to take new products to market at scale. He has done it at large companies like Samsung, PayPal, and Microsoft, as well as at 2 smaller consumer social startups. Hi, Amit.
Hi, Shobhit. Yeah, excited to be on this global panel. I am calling in from Menlo Park here in the Bay Area, and it is also a sunny day here.
So to start this panel, I would like to ask all of you a question, and then everyone can have a chance to answer that question. And the question is, can you share what kind of growth you are seeing on the ground in MLOps? What kind of companies, like industry and sizes, are you seeing adopt MLOps? Who wants to go first? Okay, Omer.
Sure. So that's an excellent question. So I think that as we see it, operationalization of ML, of machine learning, is basically the next step in the AI revolution. So we kind of witnessing this revolution starting about 7 years ago, I would say, and this is kind of the second biggest wave of what we've seen. And as we see it, everybody that use machine learning in production will need and needs the MLOps kind of discipline as a discipline to add that into his workflow and into his production systems. So from that perspective, anyone that actually use ML needs to start working on MLOps and see how we can integrate that into production and make sure that he kind of make sure that workflow is suited for that. Here in Explorium, what we see ourselves as part of this effort as being as part of the data acquisition part, and what we're seeing that our customers, when they're using machine learning, big and small, are transitioning into that type of a space. So we're working with the biggest companies as PayPal and PepsiCo, and we see them moving into that area and start using these tools. And on the other side, we have much smaller startups, much more aggressive in that sense, startup with different types of machine learning and analytics process, also using the same tools. So as we perceive that anyone that's working with machine learning should move and start working with the ML ops and kind of workflow as a discipline.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I mean, one of the things I love about my job is that I get to talk to people from like every industry. And I think we're in a special time now, having founded a previous company that was doing machine learning some 15 years ago. We were definitely a little in front of our skis there. And the speed at which weights and biases has grown is really astonishing compared to my previous experience. And a lot of that is due to the market and the various industries that are using it. And we're seeing it across all industries. I was talking to a transportation company, working on like trains in Europe that was doing reinforcement learning. Like who would have thought that it's going to be adopted into so many different industries? I'd say one of the most exciting is healthcare and drug discovery and the things that are happening around protein folding and really any like bio or medical based application. Really fascinating. Of course, the stakes are even higher in applications like that. So I'm excited we're kind of discussing what that means for tooling kind of later on in this session.
I think a funny aspect is that even if you don't call it MLOps, you're probably doing MLOps already if you have some machine learning in place. But us being a monitoring startup, we are like sitting at the end of the life cycle. And what we observe here is that not is just particular industries or companies of a certain size are more successful, but it's more related to the degree of maturity and sometimes strategic support on the level of organization that makes them really focus on machine learning and make it a priority. Because if you just pick two companies of a similar size in a similar industry, they might have very different practices, machine learning teams, products deployed. And I've seen like large organizations that still have no models in production, like large multinationals, and smaller startups that within a year, they go from 1 to 20 machine learning products. So it's really dependent a lot more on maturity, at least at present, how we see it, especially when it comes to everything that is happening pretty much after deployment.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing, Elena. It's really interesting. The modern data stack type of companies, right? These companies that have embraced like all their data in the cloud and sort of an ecosystem of products around that have such a head start on the multinationals, the Fortune 500s from 50 years ago that are dealing with like legacy data systems, SAP running on premise, and they're just it's causing all these speed bumps as they want to adopt MLOps. So I think it's like very different challenges in terms of getting to the point of maturity there. Although everyone kind of has now like locked in on where they're trying to go, right? Which is this ability to push models to production rapidly and then iterate on those once they're live.
Yeah, we've the last year for us has been like especially on the uptick, more so because we've seen as a result of the pandemic, right? There was a lot of digitization, and so along with this shifting of consumer behavior, especially for teams that had ML models deployed, and when they saw them like get hit like really overnight, and they didn't have any way to ensure that they could react to it quickly, right? So that's kind of one change that has been driving like the growth of really the understanding of the need for tooling here. And then of course, with this kind of digitization, there's also like an increased number of tooling available, and that's causing this true kind of democratization, which is leading more teams to kind of build more new models. So it's kind of a positive cycle that we're seeing, especially in the last year. And this is what kind of started at these larger companies, right? Like initially these kind of financial services companies, which really have larger budgets with larger data science teams to be able to do all this productionization. Now with this new tooling, especially in the last year, with like an explosion of tooling, we're seeing a lot more smaller teams like adopt these smaller tooling and start to kind of like push models into production. And so like a lot of explosion in the number of smaller teams doing this. And of course, the larger teams are doing this at scale now.
Thanks a lot, Amit. Thanks a lot, everyone, for your excellent answers. So one thing that we see in industry is that not every company adopts tooling for every step of the MLOps lifecycle, right? So if we think of the MLOps lifecycle and different steps, we are thinking about data acquisition, experimentation, feature store, explainability, and monitoring. So people seem to look at it as different steps. Would you like to give like a 1-minute pitch for why consumers should consider a product for your step of the MLOps life cycle?
I could start. So, I think weights and biases traditionally has been thought of as an experiment experiment kind of tracking system or platform. And it's interesting to see really this term like MLOps. It's fairly new. It's fairly fresh. And thinking back to my time at Crowdflower Figure 8, kind of the term crowdsourcing is reminiscent of this. It's like a new word for something that didn't exist before. But now I've eaten up 30 seconds of my 1-minute pitch. My 1-minute pitch for weights and biases is our collaborative tooling. I think what really sets our tool apart is the ability to collaborate across a team of data scientists or ML engineers. And one of the key features that really enables that or unlocks that is something we call reports. And you can think of reports as like a pull request for machine learning, kind of mixed with a Tableau dashboard. So you can create reports that are just kind of a snapshot of here's all the models I trained and here's what the best one is. Or you can also create them as a dashboard to kind of observe the team's progress over time and a model management registry. They're super flexible and they're really made with collaboration as a first-class citizen, which the end result then is you have this knowledge base of progress. Because the model is much more than just the hyperparameters and what the model was. It's all of the insights and the kind of tribal knowledge that is formed on the team that should be persisted somewhere as a kind of a central source of truth.
Yeah, I can go next. As I said before, Explorium is what we consider as part of the data acquisition effort, which means collecting the data in order to become or create the training set. What we kind of experience when we work with customers is that they have like those teams, the analyst team and data science team, have a very limited view on the data team, both internally, which means usually because data silos within the organization prevent them from using all of the data they can have. But more importantly, at least from our perspective, is that external data sources is almost non-existent when we're talking about any type of company. Even the biggest one, the multinational company, doesn't use external data, even if it's out there. As we see, and the reason for that is because there is a lot of barrier. The barrier of entrance to that type of to use that type of product is very high. You need to find the right provider. You need to check the samples, negotiation, engagement with different providers, and so on. And this is only for one data set from one provider. What we also know that in order to solve even a single use case, you usually need to approach 3-4 different providers and get the data in order to solve that correctly. This is where Explorium was born, in that atmosphere, in that ecosystem. Explorium was born and from the idea to be a one-stop shop for all of your external data needs. So as part of the data acquisition process, you take your internal data, then you can enrich it with any data that we can find externally. And we have thousands of data sources in our catalog, and we're able not only to automatically harmonize the external data to your core data, but also recommend what type of external data you need in order to improve the accuracy of the underlying model. That's in a nutshell.
It's a good segue to the feature store, Omer. So once you go acquire all these meaningful features from external data, how do you reuse them across models and quickly push them into production? So those are the two key things that we're solving for at Rasgo. And we believe it's the feature is kind of the most valuable asset to an organization, if you want to take an extreme view on it. The reason for that is like this IP of understanding the business context of how that data was generated, combined with the sort of statistical and ML knowledge to know what a meaningful predictor might look like parsed out of that raw data is it's extremely difficult. It requires a ton of expertise to like acquire over time, right? You can't just really walk into a company, look at their data and say, I know what the best features will be. So what we need to solve for with Rasgo is allowing these power users, these creators of meaningful features, to build those once and have them consumed throughout the organization across any model that a colleague might build. So that repeatability and reusability, I think, is critical. If you invest in the feature store up front, you'll save significant time later as you want to put more models into production.
Elena or Amit?
Yeah, do you want to go
you
next?
worked on it?
Yeah, I can go next. So, so the pitch for monitoring, at least the way I see it, is like teams that want to do ML, they have to bring in data science teams, and data science teams can be expensive. So typically they deploy a lot of the machine learning models developed by the data science teams in very high ROI use cases. Like, for example, when we talk to banks, fintechs, they deploy it to, like, let's say credit origination, or let's say anti-fraud, or if you're talking to social media companies, in their feeds or in their ads model. So these are very high ROI use cases, given how expensive it is to deploy machine learning and have these teams. And the thing is with these machine learning models is they can fail silently, they can decay. And so when that happens, it has a direct hit to your business metric. And these are high ROI use cases. So you can imagine what an impact that can have. We've kind of spoken to teams that have lost like $500,000 over a weekend, at the start of the pandemic, not kind of tracking these models. So if you're not monitoring machine learning models, you're losing money. And so you should monitor machine learning models. That's the pitch for monitoring. For explainability, it's more like if you cannot explain your models, you cannot validate them, you cannot improve them, you cannot debug them, you cannot assess them for bias, you cannot assess them for risk, or build trust with your stakeholders. And so this hurts the actual time to market. This hurts mean time to resolution if you have an issue and want to resolve it quickly. It even hurts revenue opportunities if you're not able to explain these models. And so this is a solved problem. And so that's why you should explain your models.
I want to echo the monitoring pitch, maybe just a few more brush strokes to add. There is, of course, a reasoning to why you have to monitor your models. We know that it's not a one and done sort of thing. Things change, patterns evolve, data can break, data can drift. If you don't detect this on time, things can go haywire very quickly. And indeed, there's a very clear ROI explanation to that, because when you talk about monitoring, we talk about the phase in the life cycle when the models are delivering the value that they're supposed to, or when the risks that we are aware of can actually materialize. So you need to prevent that from happening. But surprisingly to me, and maybe to many others, like many teams start with zero monitoring. So they don't look at their models at all until the first things break. Then they maybe add like 1 or 2 metrics, to some dashboard to look at. But it might work well when you have like 1, 2, 3 models that are maintained by the same person who created them. But when you scale and you have like 20, 50 models that are maintained by different people from the original creators, you actually need a very stable and robust system, whether built in-house or external, but you do need to have proper tooling for this part of the lifecycle.
Thanks a lot, everyone, for that kind of a guidance. I would like to ask a few more targeted questions. So the next question is for Omer, Chris, and Elena, and I'll ask them in, they'll all go in separate orders. I want to ask, what are the biggest trends in your domain of MLOps that you're seeing out there?
Sure. That's an interesting question. I think one of the things that we've seen a lot of in the last 3 years is an explosion in terms of external data and the ability to buy data, external data into organization. In the last 3 or 4 years, there was a good exponential growth both in supply and demand. So from the supply side, we see new provider coming up with every day, new companies coming and suggesting or trying to sell different type of data with different raw data as processing data and so on. So there is a lot of new data coming in. The market itself is super fragmented, which actually make it much harder for the demand on the other side of the equation to actually use the data. On the other side, we've seen the demand, and what I think this is important with that part of the equation is that up until, let's say, 5 years ago, it was pretty obvious for financial institutions, the hedge fund of the world, to use data and external data. And there is lots of kind of esoteric stories about how would they manipulate satellite data in order to define, to get prediction on the stock price of Walmart. There's a lot of those type of stories. What we're seeing is that this type of technology, those type of use cases are being moved into much more central stream, in a sense. Almost all companies, we see it, we work a lot with a lot of the biggest companies, the CPGs company in the world. And what we're seeing there, that they also starting to use the same approach that those hedge fund did like 5 years ago, now to do their own type of prediction in order to solve other business use case. So from that perspective, definitely the trend is explosion in external data. There's a lot of new data out there that businesses can use, and we're seeing on the other side that those type of businesses actually adopt the data and use it in production.
Thanks.
I can go quick. Our tool is definitely focused on the teams that are using deep learning, but we also support traditional machine learning models. I think trends in general is like everyone's doing more machine learning, but specifically within the deep learning world, it's clear that like PyTorch has emerged as the framework of choice for the majority of our users, which is kind of very interesting to see, having started the company when TensorFlow was kind of the enterprise, if you're doing this in a business framework, and now PyTorch has kind of definitely emerged as the winner, which is fascinating. The last thing I'd say is like the language modeling is definitely a big trend lately. The size of these massive transformer models, and now the ability to do transfer learning, on top of them is creating a whole bunch of cool use cases. One I saw yesterday was trending on Hacker News. There's a website that says thisworddoesnotexist.com, and it's a transformer that's like generating new words and definitions for a dictionary, and they're great. It's a really fun site to check out. So that's a random pitch, but yeah.
And talking about monitoring trends, I think one part is generally awareness and maturity, because especially with the recent pandemic, the whole idea that the models don't last forever became pretty obvious, including to executives. So now there is certain like executive support and in general like proactive approach to monitoring, not just reactive as we've seen it before. And there are a lot of tactical things around this that we have not solved yet as an industry, but the companies are now trying to figure out, such as who's actually owning monitoring, because it's a very collaborative effort. You have data scientists, you have machine learning engineers, you have business owners, you have DevOps, and all these people sort of have to come together when you have a system in place that is operational. And how you solve it, how do you build processes around it is something that is pretty new. And it's very interesting to see how it is evolving.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, one of the things, so one of the things I wanted to add to like Elena's, comment is the need to kind of proactively do kind of monitoring. That's just wanted to double click on that. Last year, when we would go in and pitch monitoring, we would have to tell teams what drift is. And this year, when we pitch monitoring, they actually tell us, do we have drift? And then we have to then deep dive into, okay, now you know drift. So is this shift change in like the understanding of concepts in the community. And this is really just going to happen in that 1 year.
Thanks, everyone. For my next question, I want to address it to Patrick and Amit. What are the biggest operationalization pain points that you hear from your customers?
Yeah, it's a good one. We hear it a ton, so I'll give you the highlights. The worst part of deploying features for models in production is managing a distinction between offline and online, right? That distinction, I think, has been there a long time. Feature stores are there to theoretically solve that. I don't know, some seem to make it worse, not better, but we're trying to help with that problem. What we're specifically doing to like resolve that gap is just unifying into one store, right? Allowing like a single API to serve batch sets and then serve inference sets or feature value lookups in near real time. And I think that one pain point is enough for a lot of people to investigate the feature store. The second thing though is like reusability. So much data processing code gets bundled with the model in a production setting, which when you first are deploying seems like a great idea, right? A lot faster to get it out and live. It comes back to bite you later when you realize like, oh, if I want to reuse that feature across two models, I'm now either computing it within both of those model like objects as like a final processing step, or I need to create a separate data store, right, to persist that and then serve it to that model. So I think that issue is sort of like secondary because it doesn't block you from going to production, but it's still pretty painful when you encounter it.
Yeah, from what we are seeing, like there's like a broad range of operationalizing pain points. So I'll focus on the one specific to what we're looking at. But if you're in like a regulated industry, then you cannot deploy machine learning models if you cannot validate them and you cannot really monitor them. And so that's a key. So when larger teams look to kind of ensure that their actual ML practice is done right, then they have to like really think through end to end and kind of make sure that they comply with all these regulations. So that's like an operational kind of pain point for them. And so they have to put everything in place before they even start deploying machine learning models. It's not like other teams where you start it and then you kind of add all these steps later on. And then on the monitoring front specifically, like what teams are realizing is like the ones that started early on like monitoring their kind of models there, what they realized when like after monitoring one or two models is this is a lot of work. And typically they teams start with kind of potentially using open source, right? And open source is good if you don't want to run it at scale, works well. But then when they cross that 5 model threshold and they get these tickets and and they're seeing in the horizon that okay, this 5 is going to become 20, 50, right? The key operational pain point is how do you scale, right? And so they don't want to babysit these models. And of course, the models are high ROI. So just scaling out that function, the actual monitoring aspect of it, and doing it in a centralized way. We also see teams which really have sub teams that do it in like a different way. And now, when you want to do it in a centralized way with some kind of governance, that's really hard. So just running models at scale takes you to a next level of operationalization challenges.
Thanks, Amit. For my next question, I want to understand how are you recommending your customers to build responsible AI? Because responsible AI is almost like a new pillar of the machine learning lifecycle. So it is new and we might need to educate our customers. How are you doing it? It's for everyone who wants to go next.
I can go next. In fact, responsible AI, or in many cases, explainable AI or explainable machine learning is something that we work a lot with. However, I do think that it might be selection bias for the people, the company that we're seeing, because those type of company actually chose a certain way or a certain approach to address it. I think that the main point about explainable AI is there is like a trade-off between the accuracy of the model and how explainable it is. That kind of the trade-off that the data science and machine learning teams are actually trying to figure out and optimize in many cases. However, kind of what company that we meet, and at least that also kind of resonate well with our philosophy, that in order to improve kind of the accuracy of the model, there are actually two ways to do that. Either add complexity, add more layers of more layers to the network. That's the first case. The second case is bring better features coming from better data, and with different facets of the problem already create those features to give more accuracy. So as we see it, kind of the trend of responsible AI actually makes the models much more simpler, more decision trees than XGBoost. And by using that, they lower the accuracy. They compensate about that by using features from external data, for example. That kind of a trend that we're seeing when it comes to responsible AI.
Yeah, just to capitalize on that, I think it's a great point, Omer. The feature is sort of like the core of explaining what the model's doing, right? And I like how you described it with that trade-off being something they wrestle with. I think the thing that surprised me here as I talk to more and more users that are doing feature engineering is the lack of understanding of like feature importance, right? And what it means, what techniques are popular for it. Shapley as a package has gotten more popular recently, but I think is still like massively underutilized, right? Simple concept of like, we'll take some sort of game theory and look at how our features are affecting the prediction of the model. By kind of building that into our feature store, we unlocked a lot of visibility for users. And the scary thing is when you ask like, well, what were you doing before to understand, what was affecting your model's prediction? It was a lot of like, I don't have time for that, right? I just got to get this thing deployed and move on to the next one. So I think more sort of literacy around that topic will be key.
I have a slightly different angle here. Is that there is a lot of like high-level discussion about responsible AI and in general like kind of theory behind it, like why we should do this, but there is not much about like who should do this and when and how to actually bake it in the model development process. And I think there is a role that many teams lack, which is a sort of a machine learning product manager, or maybe someone who just wears this hat, who's actually the one to think about not just the model as like a technical artifact, but rather the product that this model, like the value that it delivers, all the second order effects, all the design problems around it, all the usability issues, which touch, of course, upon this responsible AI topic, but it's much broader than that. And I urge teams to actually review this, like who is responsible for it? Because I've seen situations when it's basically thrown in between risk managers and data scientists, like with no one to own it in between. So looking at this from this standpoint is definitely a good place to start.
Yeah, I'd say from my end, kind of going back to my experience at Crowdflower Figure 8, like it starts with the data. Like even before we get to the feature store, ensuring that you really understand how that data was collected, how it's distributed, how it might have some like inherent bias or something that will ultimately impact the model. And even if you can explain what the model did, it's doing something that is potentially bad or poorly affects the end user. The other thing I'd say with weights and biases, especially, is we try to keep really a full lineage of what happened during the modeling practice, because eventually there will be mistakes that are made. Someone will, incorrectly apply some transformation, and hopefully, with all of the tools represented here, we're able to prevent that model from getting into production. But should it get into production, being able to trace back and see exactly what data and what code and what hyperparameters in which users were involved in that process are going to ultimately help teams to kind of make their modeling function more robust and ultimately more responsible.
Yeah, good points from the panel. One of the things that I would add is we kind of like recommend and urge teams to not just do AI fast, but to focus on doing AI right. And we're seeing like a lot of challenges in the news from teams who are running it on scale and have just done it fast, right? And so this whole we recommend that teams build in as much visibility around the models, right? Processes, and this includes the point Elena made around like who's accountable for this, right? And what should they be able to hold the line? Should they be able to say no, right? And of course, tooling around this, right? So if you don't have tooling, you don't have visibility. That's not going to feed into your process. So process and tooling is important, and just like the ability to want to do it right and not just do it fast. And so this means you need contextual visibility. So for example, model like that developers might need fine-grained control, right? Need access to Shapley values, the one that Patrick recommended. Whereas if you're on the actual business side or the end user, you might need something that's more higher level, but at least something that gives you transparency into like what's happening, right? And of course, included in this process is fairness considerations. If you're working on like a use case that can have fairness, kind of bias impact, and kind of taking that into account, it's astonishing to us that people like on teams, they have not really started to absorb the implications of the ROI of these models that they're building for the use cases. But I think it's more a reality of the maturity of where we are, and I like really like what we urge is just more visibility. And as the industry evolves, there'll be a lot more kind of like a lot more democratization of knowledge here.
Thanks a lot, everyone. So responsible AI goes kind of hand in hand with regulation. And we all know that the European Union recently released a draft AI regulation. Other countries have also either released their regulation or, like the US, are considering them. Can you share thoughts on the upcoming regulations and advice for companies? This question is for everyone.
Can maybe start here? So I think it is, of course, still a draft, but it's definitely not the reason to ignore what's happening. And maybe it's a good moment to kind of stop and review what you're actually doing. And I think particularly the EU draft, it has a lot of healthy ideas about risk management and risk assessment on different models that you are developing. And this sort of audit that you can start without any regulation is something that companies should be doing, because it's also surprising how many don't even know how many systems they have in place, where they are in the organization. So it's completely zero governance. And I think it's like a good wake-up call in a way to start looking into it, because of course, introducing this in practice is going to take a lot of time. And hearing like some own framework that you develop internally may be a good place to start, not just because organizations like should do this, but because it's the right thing to do. And now it's a good moment to start thinking, not only if you're in the regulated industries. I mean, I think the regulated industries are better prepared for it because they already have processes in place. But even if you're working on so-called low-risk use cases, at least like audit, document, like figure out where these systems are in the organization, who is owning them.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think regulation is a very good thing and very much needed. This space is moving so quickly, and startups especially, or people adopting this like new technology, have a whole bunch of different initiatives to kind of weigh against. And if there isn't an incentive, or in this case maybe a legal disincentive to focus on something, people aren't going to focus on it. I'd say the other thing that is familiar to my world is the kind of chief information security officer at Weights and Biases. I'm already used to regulation like GDPR, but more interesting, we have things like SOC 2 Type 2 or HIPAA or ISO 27001, and these compliance frameworks allow us to do business easier with other entities, right? If I want to buy some other third-party software, I ask them for their SOC 2 Type 2 report, which tells me, okay, they've thought about security. And usually when I'm selling to third-party vendors, they go even further and make me fill out a big questionnaire asking me, how much do I care about security? I think we should have something similar for ethical and responsible AI, to be able to like understand at least that the team they care about this, and it becomes a cultural thing more than even a compliance framework. It needs to be something that the whole team is aligned around and rallying around, because the downside risks are very substantial in many cases.
I can go next. We always compare kind of the new regulation or the draft of the regulation to what happened 15 years ago with GDPR, and I'm happy Chris mentioned that. It started very slow, but it gained traction during the last 15 years, and now it's pretty obvious when you think about data privacy that you think about GDPR and then CCP and so on. And I definitely believe that the same type of case will be here too. So we'll start small, it starts slow, but in 5 or 6 years it'll be obvious, and you build model with a certain procedure in place. So my advice to anyone that is building model and looking to the future is to pay attention to the regulation, because they will fundamentally change how we build models.
And it's a really good perspective on like why best in breed in the MLOps stack might be beneficial, so that as an individual company, you're not solving for like those regulation challenges at every single point within the MLOps process. And instead you can work with the vendor, right? Like Chris was saying, the whatever certification we come up with here, once you have that should sort of insulate the company a little bit from having to build all of these kind of checks and balances in-house.
Yeah, I feel typically the actual sentiment around regulation is that it's going to slow things down, right? That's typically what people think. But in this case, as you're looking at all the concerns around AI, like I believe that some lightweight regulation would actually accelerate AI, would give a lot of guidelines in place and help teams kind of know how to do it right. I particularly like the simplicity of the EU regulations, where they like really classify like all types of like AI systems, from like the ones that are banned to the ones that are high risk to the ones that are low risk. And so they kind of add a lot of restrictions and kind of guidelines more to the high risk ones. These are ones that can of course make like, let's say, lending decisions that can change, that can have an impact on your lives. Or this could be autonomous car like machine learning models. And so there, all the EU says is that, hey, our goal is to build trust. And what we want teams to do is have visibility into how these, like, where's the data coming from? How is this model being built? Is this meeting all the requirements that you actually laid out? And when you deploy it, is it operating the same? Can users control it? Right. So it's very simple in its classification. And and I think that all the conversations we've had today around like really bringing visibility with the new kind of processes and toolings are like a step in the right direction. These already exist, as like Elena mentioned. In kind of financial services, they have the concept of moderate risk management. Of course, here in the US, as a byproduct of the financial crisis, that has served them well. And so just kind of taking some of those concepts and applying it in like a lightweight way, like to all the teams as they look ahead to kind of potentially, complying with these lightweight regulations coming up, would hold the teams in good stead.
Awesome. Thank you. It is time to wrap things up here. So a big thank you to all of the panelists for really in-depth discussion, some interesting points that were brought up. Next up is our first tech talk, this focusing on reliable and practical algorithmic recourse. If you're not automatically forwarded to that, just remember to click on the agenda tab to get to the next. So with that, we'll see you all in the next session.